there are people that are viewing and putting comments in the chat room, and I was wondering, it's not people that are part of the meeting. Who is monitoring the chat room to answer their questions? It may be the public. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I don't even want to get into the habit of answering questions. I mean, somebody can, if we could give,
Okay.
we can give a phone number out, maybe.
Is Christian
Mark.
on? He
Yeah,
could.
tomorrow, excuse me.
The question disappeared now, so I'm not sure what happened to it.
So Linda blocked those questions, but I'll ask Jamar or Frank at the end of this discussion to leave some contact information for anybody
Okay.
listening to the meeting that has questions about the ARPA process, that they can reach directly to those specific contacts. I don't want the members of administration having to be distracted trying to address a bunch of questions now either. So
Right.
this is actually our time to get up to speed with this process, and I'll make sure we stay focused. So I'll turn it over to Frank or Jamar, whoever's doing the introduction.
Well, Council President, the mayor is present, so he's going to have some opening remarks before I introduce the consultants.
All right. Yep. Mayor, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Council President. Good evening, everyone. As I always like to thank each and every one of the council members for their continuous commitment to make Reading a place, as well as the employees, consultants, and the stakeholders that take part. Muy buenas noches a todos y gracias por permitirnos presentar ante el Consejo. So I just wanted to greet the Spanish-speaking community. So tonight you're going to hear from our finance director and our interim manager and director on how our administration plans to strengthen our city by supporting our local businesses, elevating our local not-for-profit organizations, improving recreational facilities. And these are efforts that would take Reading to the next level with the help of American Rescue Plan Act funds. Some of the projects you're going to hear tonight are a result of an extensive individual presentations, research done by administration, 2 public community forums, and ongoing feedback from stakeholders, to say the least. You will also learn about the ARPA grant funding guidelines, which is crucial to get familiarized with, and the procedures. The process will have developed with ensure we get to this process and get done right. As I've said many times before, we only have one shot at this, guys, and we will proceed with caution to make sure that we get it done right and use these funds wisely, to say the least. It is important for me to emphasize on our administration foundational pillars since I got elected, which are safe streets and neighborhoods, education and workforce development, community and economic development, and of course, responsible leadership. I often talk about these 4 pillars because they are a priority, and our recommendation will support them. This one-time funding opportunity from the federal government will leave, as you know, a long-lasting impact on our communities for generations to come. So as your mayor, I will continue to create opportunities for growth and build the synergy I often talk about to make Reading the best place to live, learn, work, play, and raise a family. So again, thank you so much for your time, your commitment, and let's make Reading a better place to live.
Thank you, Mayor.
I will turn it over back to, I believe, Frank.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I introduce our guests here today, after my introductions, Jamar Kelly will give a quick synopsis of their scope of, kind of what their role is. Then we'll get into the guest presentation. I believe they'll be showing you a PowerPoint within our 30-minute allocated time. So I'd like to welcome Corey and Kimberly from the ZA Group, who is our consultant to help us with the compliance and help guide us in this process. So I'm very excited for them to be here. I know they're going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation. Jamar, if I'm correct, maybe I'm wrong, will this be the time that you want to just briefly go over what their role is from a scope of service? So when they do their presentation, kind of everything kind of comes together. Thank you.
Frank, Mayor and members of council. So just as a reminder, during the summer and into the fall, we had explained that we would run our rescue plan process in line with the budget, as well as make sure that we secured the help of a financial accounting firm that can help us make sure that we do everything right in terms of compliance with the American Rescue Plan Act. We did a public bid. There were 12 proposals received, and ultimately back in November 22nd, council awarded the contract to ZA. The scope of services includes a review of legal requirements, guidance, and interpretation of ARPA in accordance with uniform guidance referencing 2 CFR 200. Those are the federal guidelines that came out of the first coronavirus package. Number 2, assist in administration and control procedures for review of grant requirements, guidance, and interpretation. Establish control procedures of grant proposals that are selected for funding. Assist in developing policies and procedures for administrative, accounting, and grant compliance oversight. Advise on proper fund structure, accounting standards, internal controls, and compliance. Assist with creation and maintenance of project files. These files must demonstrate compliance with all applicable state, local, and federal regulations. Assist with compliance and monitoring of our subrecipients and beneficiaries, including the review of funding requests that are submitted by subrecipients, as well as auditing for appropriate controls and documentation, which is one of the most important parts about making sure that we account, as the mayor has said, for every single dime of this funding. Assist in establishing an internal financial tracking system to ensure the funds are expended within established timelines, recorded appropriately in our accounting system, and generate information needed for periodic reporting to the grant agency. This part is rather timely insofar as we just went live in our new accounting and general ledger system. So to the extent that we need to create those reports for the federal government, we can do so now. Assist with preparation and monitoring for audit responses to findings and/or concerns. And lastly, assist with other grant administration related activities and technical assistance as needed. That part is very relevant, and I'll get into it a little bit more once we get into the draft allocation plan. With that, I'd like to pause here and Frank, take it away.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Shamar, for that background information. So once again, I'd like to welcome Corey and Kim to the city council meeting. And so I'll lead off with you guys, whoever's taking the lead.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nice, everybody. We've heard great things, and we're looking forward to being part of your team and helping the city achieve its goals. I'm going to share the screen real quick here. There we go. So just a brief overview of the American Rescue Plan Act and the local fiscal recovery funds. I'm Corey. Kim's also on with us. She's going to be jumping in as well. We're going to do this at a 60,000 foot level, and we wanted to leave time for questions from council so that we can clarify anything that's out there. I mean, this isn't necessarily new at this point. So I'm sure everybody's heard a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts, what you can, what you can't do type of thing. So that's really what we're here to answer, to give you a brief background on us. I mean, we're working with about 200 different municipalities in over 40 counties, in Pennsylvania and other states as well. So, Kim and I, we've been living this nonstop back through the CARES Act, which really the American Rescue Plan is an extension of that CARES Act. Sorry. It froze on me there for a second. I'm going to back up.
All those clicks went through at once.
Yeah. This is the page that I really want you to focus on. It kind of lists out here the 4 categories of where you're allowed to spend funds. The first one is to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. This is with the including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, hospitality. I'm sure as you watched last year with the CARES Act and even currently what's going on, even in Berks County for that matter, this is where, you know, there were funds given out to small businesses, to nonprofits that are 501c3s or 501c19s. This is the prong where that's done as well. Like anything related to COVID testing, health centers, anything related to that, a direct, contract tracing, any expenses related to that, they're directly eligible here under the negative economic impact. In CARES Act, we've seen a lot of money go out in this form. We're also seeing a lot of money go out under this prong, with the American Rescue Plan. The second one I'm going to save till last, the provision of government services. The third one is premium pay for essential workers, which is capped at $13 an hour and $25,000 per individual per year. Not seeing a lot of use of the premium pay, for different reasons, but it can be done, and you can actually go back to January 27th of 2020 to calculate premium pay, to pay people who were deemed essential by management. And to be eligible, they had to be working those hours in person. You cannot be working remotely to be eligible for premium pay. That's the big one there. The last one here, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. I would also include stormwater in that. So this one was recently updated with the final rule, which came out the second week of January. So now you can do roads and bridges as well under number 4. I think the key to number 4, when you're looking at water and sewer, if I put it in plain English, as long as you're positively affecting water quality, the projects would more than likely be eligible. Broadband infrastructure, a little more picky. There's some stringent specifications that need to be met to spend these funds directly on broadband infrastructure. But again, a lot of municipalities now, roads, bridges, things like that, they are now eligible expenditures as of the second week of January. The one I really want to touch on here is number 2, the provision of governmental services. This is where, when the final rule came out, this was the single biggest change from the interim rule to the final rule. So governments now have a choice to make. They can either take a one-time $10 million exception, basically meaning you can presume that 10 million of what you're getting is presumed to be lost revenue without having to prove it. Or you can calculate lost revenue each year. That's 2020, 21, 22, 23. And you can use the greater of the two. So in your case, our teams looked at it, it makes a lot more sense in your case actually calculating each of the 4 years, because you want to use as much of the funding as you can under the provision of government services. It allows you to spend on a much wider variety of items. And you also, at that point, you lose a lot of the risks that are out there, like reporting risks, time risk, a lot of things. Most of my clients are trying to report as much as they possibly can under the provision of government services. And we can talk about that during questions. So these funds can be used to cover eligible expenditures through December 31st, 2024. And there's a caveat: as long as an obligation's been incurred by that date, that December 31st, 2024 date, payment can actually be made through December 31, 2026. So again, that's for directly eligible expenses. So if you're doing a big water project and it's going to take them 3 years to get done, or 4 years, that's going to extend past 2024, you're okay. You can get it done through the end of 26 and pay those expenses using these funds. the last bullet point there, as a result, there's no need to actually receive the goods or services by the end of 24, so long as they've been ordered or under contract. Here's some of the no-nos of what you can't do directly with these funds. Anything that is spent improperly, must be repaid to U.S. Treasury. We've seen that happen already. We've seen Treasury agents on the ground, or they've been reported, and Treasury is, in a few cases around the country, had funds already paid back to them. So funds cannot be directly deposited into any pension fund. Funds can be transferred to private nonprofit organizations, public transit agencies, or special purpose units of government. That's one of the big differences from the CARES Act. It was harder to do it under the CARES Act, and I think there's a lot more leeway this time under the American Rescue Plan. Treasury has issued final or interim and final regulations and FAQs, and regular reports to U.S. Treasury regarding the use of funds are required. So in your case, those reports are due every quarter from here on out, and they're calendar year quarters. What's our role? So our role is making sure that everything that the city wants to do is within the guidelines of the American Rescue Plan. So the city has developed a draft allocation spreadsheet. We've reviewed that. We think the city, did a great job. So we're on board with, in terms of eligibility, our role is just to say, you can spend it on this or you can't. We don't really come up with the ideas per se. So we've reviewed that. We think, again, the team's done a great job. I think everything's heading in the right direction, and certainly is well within the regulations. We'll also help with the reporting. The reporting can get quite tricky. There's a lot of information that needs to be tracked in terms of projects, supporting documentation, how the general ledger's set up, things of that nature. So we have a big role there in helping try to compile all that and make sure everything's in order. And last but not least, compliance documentation. We want to make sure that there's no issues with any audit, whether that's from your external auditors or from United States Treasury. And everything that's spent, we're going to document as to why it is eligible. It is an eligible expense under the American Rescue Plan. So Jamar gave a little more detail there, but that's, in summary version, that's our role, is trying to make sure everything is in compliance with the regulations from top to bottom. And obviously in the meantime, we're looking at policies, procedures, grant applications, announcements. I think one of the nice things we bring to the table with all the clients we've probably seen it and dealt with it before. We have a lot of examples of grant agreements, announcements, processes, policies, procedures. And so we do share them as much as we can among our clients, so people are not recreating a wheel. With that, I wanted to turn it over to council for any questions. Again, I was really trying to cover this at a 60,000-foot view. I'm sure there's a lot of questions based on everything that's been out there in the public. So,
All right, Corey, thank you. Council will open it up for questions. Anybody want to lead off? All right, I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Marcia.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for that concise presentation. And am I correct that when we were first communicating with the public regarding this, we didn't have all these guidance documents that may be changing the way that we look at the process?
That's an accurate statement. Again, the interim rule came out mid-year last year, and it took them till the second week of January to come out with a final rule. And keep in mind, something I want to emphasize, when the final rule came out, that's like a new starting point. It's not an ending point. There will be frequently asked questions that are issued over the next few years that'll continually update and clarify these rules. So in essence, it's always a little bit of a moving target. But I think the way they laid the final rules out gave us a real good indication where things are going. And I think it's made everybody pretty comfortable that there's certainly a lot of eligible areas to use these funds that are beneficial to communities.
The information you presented, I think, is very important for the public to understand as it guides our decision-making. Can all that documentation, including the PowerPoint, be put somewhere? I don't know whether you can answer this question, but be put somewhere on our website so the public has an understanding. We are following very concise guidelines, working with the consultant. We're not making this up as we go along. Things may change, and that's for the public to understand where they can access the information.
Counselor Goodman Hendershits, we are going to have a landing page on the website dedicated.
Okay.
That's part of the presentation that'll be explained this evening.
Okay, and will that be available in English and Spanish? I know that's something that may be important to some of our constituents. And you may not won't be able to answer that right away, but it's just a consideration.
We'll get it translated, no worries.
Okay, thank you. And I probably have a lot more questions coming up, but give my fellow counselors some time.
Yeah, I wanted to make one more comment if I could. So we're also at a point in time where I think there's a decision to be made or start thinking about from council's perspective. I was talking about the revenue replacement, the calculation of lost revenue. And so that calculation was done for the year 2020. And so you're at a point in time where you are allowed to move those funds over from your American Rescue Plan account to your general fund. And once you do that, that effectively recharacterizes those dollars. It unrestricts those funds.
Corey, can you explain what was that allocation again?
So I was talking about the lost revenue. So each year lost revenue.
Okay, gotcha.
So for instance, it was calculated for 2020. In Jamar, I don't remember the number in the top of my head.
I have it pulled out if you want me to.
It was
What
updated.
what was the general range of that amount? Yeah.
So that amount grew to 14 million with the final rule.
With the final, there was a little change.
14 million, so we can transfer that over to the general fund and recategorize that as general fund dollars?
You can.
That's interesting. Okay.
And then you can use that to achieve the goals, I think that, were developed for the city.
Right,
And
within the
what you're
general
gonna do-
fund, you mean, within the general
Yeah.
fund.
Yeah, you
So
can use that
that's the
going
first
forward.
time I've heard that amount being able to be recategorized. That's huge. Okay.
That's pretty
Yeah,
stunning.
we were waiting on guidance from the final rule that, to see if they were going to take that ability away, and they didn't. I know nobody was comfortable moving those funds until the final rule came out.
All right, Donna?
Council President, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor, and then Donna.
Okay, thank you. Corey, thank you so much once again for your amazing presentation. It's exactly what I expected and some. I don't want to sound redundant, but I think it's very important, and I love that Councilwoman Marsha alluded to it, that we understand that the way we were perhaps first understanding and talking about the dispense of ARPA funds may have slightly changed.
Mayor, we're losing you.
As of recently of 6 weeks ago. That understanding couldn't, rather than what we had understood in the beginning. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Yes.
It's fine. I mean, we have time to calibrate here. So good point, Mayor. Donna, you were next. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to be absolutely clear about this $14 million. Is this, when this goes into the general fund, it's restricted or it's not restricted?
Well, we
It's
can
restricted
restrict it. We
It's
can put-
restricted because of
Yeah.
where it came from.
Yeah, we can put it in a fund, enterprise fund, anything that goes into our fund balance is restricted until we approve its use.
Okay.
Just to remind everybody. So,
Yeah, I just was curious about where it was capital or where it was operating or where,
we can use it where we want to, and we will.
other than pension, you can't use it for pension.
Use it for pension. Well, even at that point, it's general fund dollars. It's not even, from what I'm hearing, it's not under any restriction.
So
So
it's
That's
simply
correct.
general fund revenue coming into our revenue.
Think
coming
about it
into our-
like this for 1 second. You sitting in the American Rescue Plan Fund, the funds are federal dollars. They're restricted for the purposes of that grant. When they're used for a provision of governmental service and moved to the general fund, they're basically local tax dollars.
Really? Okay.
And so one of the benefits of that, like as other funding comes down the line, as we all know, an infrastructure bill passed, and there's going to be other things that pass. I think one of the keys here is you can use these funds as local match dollars too towards other grants.
Ah, that's That's fabulous. That doubles
Yeah.
the,
Uh,
very good.
Because there
Council,
was a concern, about using federal dollars to match a federal grant. And you have to literally review each grant to be able to do it. A lot of them do not allow you to do that.
Mm.
But recharacterizing those dollars, now you're matching a federal grant with local dollars. Big difference.
Jamar?
Okay.
so
gotcha.
there's a question from Councilor Cepeda Freitas, what are the services going to cost us? The agenda memo explains, this contract was awarded at an hourly rate, $3.25 per hour for partner principal, $2.15 per hour for a manager. There will be an ordinance coming before council at your next meeting to appropriate $150,000 to be available to fund consulting expenses in our first year.
Can ARPA funds be used to cover that?
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Great.
wouldn't use the general fund dollars for that.
All right. All right.
Quick question, Jeff.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead. Maria.
sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. After the money the 40 million get transferred to the general fund, can some of that revenue can be used for capital project as well by council approval?
Yes, I mean, obviously with council approval, I mean, and that would be an area where if you're looking to do big capital type items, we would certainly advise doing it that way, because trying to do capital items directly under the final rule, there's a lot of regulations and hoops that need to be jumped through. And I would tell you it's very risky. So to take that risk off the table, you use the lost revenue to do that.
And this is just for the year 2020. What about 2021, 2022? You think
You're
the
gonna do
same would
this
be-
each year up to the amount of calculated lost revenue. Which, to give you some sense of timing, you're gonna need to wait till your audit's done each year. So you're using final audited numbers to know that that calculation's a good number.
What about if there is a fund surplus at the end of the year in the general fund balance?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
If there is a surplus in the general fund, let's say for the year 2020, there was a surplus in the general fund.
That has nothing to do with the calculation.
Okay,
Inflation is revenue basically in 19 with an inflation factor attached to it. And there's certain things you're allowed to include in that calculation, certain things you're not. And it's taking that calculated a certain way and comparing that to 2020, 21, 22, 23.
okay,
With
thank
an
you.
inflation factor attached to it. And that was actually one of the nice things is under the final rule, the Fed increased the inflation factor we're allowed to use from 4.1% to 5.2%. That may not sound like much, but that's a big deal. That's millions of dollars a year in calculated lost revenue.
Okay, we had a question from Brianna. I just want to make sure that it was clear on the question. Brianna, did you want to just ask the question? Yeah, go ahead, Brianna.
I believe that Johanny was first. What are these? And her question is, what are these services going to cost us? I'm curious about that.
Okay, Jamar covered that. And then you also asked what services, isn't that correct? If
Yeah.
you could cover that again, Jamar, and then what services are covered?
Generally speaking, compliance, controls, auditing, and administration of the funding is the services that are being provided by ZA. The hourly rate is $3.25 for a partner and $2.15 for a manager. There's a budget appropriation coming to council for your next legislative meeting, requesting access to $150,000 in 2022 to pay for consulting services. That does not mean that we plan to spend $150,000. It just gets us access to that level of funding to pay for services.
All right.
To be clear, we've been engaged with our partners at ZA since the contract was awarded. They helped us to submit the first report that went in at the end of January. We'll be doing the next revenue replacement calculation actually at the end of next month. Corey will be using the statement of financial condition that we submit to DCED for revenue replacement calculations.
All right. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for that.
Certainly.
Okay, I don't know, Corey or Kimberly, can you go back over the timelines again as well? Maybe you already said them, I didn't hear, but when we have to have everything mapped out and then the spending
Sure.
timelines.
So eligibility for everything other than premium pay starts at March 3rd, 2021, under the Act. So for instance, if you spent something March 5th, 2021, and it was eligible, you could reimburse yourself for that. Okay, so that goes through the end of 2024.
2024, okay.
If something is obligated or under contract by the end of 2024 and it's an eligible project, you have until the end of 2026 to finish that project and pay those expenses out.
Gotcha. Okay. So obviously we don't want to take to the end of 2024, but we have a nice amount of time to properly plan and allocate, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yep. And for whatever it's worth, and I'm totally taking a guess here, but we seen at the end of the CARES Act, which was really tough. They'd said, okay, we're giving you all this money in July and you have to spend by the end of December. Well, come December, they extended that. So, I think depending on what they're looking at nationwide, it wouldn't totally blow me away that there's some extensions on things, depending on what types of projects are being done.
Okay, and I believe Marcia has a question, and then I have a comment to make. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, it's a follow-up. Because there's so much important reporting that needs to be done, could you come up with a schedule of when we would be receiving reports for the status of the projects that were approved, whether they were funded, whether they're on target, whether we need to make any modifications, and also that we're also in compliance? I just think it's important for council to have a regular update, so we're not in any way caught off guard if anything isn't proceeding the way that we might expect it to be.
Marcia, with the new schedule, the council meeting schedule, we
Right.
have a monthly fixed meeting. We can certainly have Kim and Corey join us on a quarterly basis. I don't think that'd be too much to ask.
Yeah, I would just, with my previous experiences with CDBG, I would just be really much more comfortable having that incorporated into this schedule.
Yeah, and for council's reference, all these ARPA funds are in I don't know if I need to call it an enterprise fund, but a separate fund that, all disbursements will get approved, by council, reviewed by the auditor, plus our consultants as we move forward. So, they'll rubber stamp. You guys will help us filter it to make sure it meets, the requirements. And we'll make sure that it's properly approved, and the administration will properly make sure it's properly used for what it's approved for. So just so everyone knows where that money is, it's not in the general fund, it's not in a pension fund or capital fund or some sewer fund. It's sitting in its own fund, and the controls are there, especially with the addition of the consultants to
Yeah,
help us.
Its own fund and bank account, Council President.
And own bank account. Okay. Is my
It's
name
called
on
a
the,
special, it's called a special revenue fund. So
is
they
my
were
name on
worried
that
about the-
account by chance? No,
No, sir.
it's not. Okay. Well, all right. So
Corey, quick question. It would be
Maria.
appropriate to, for any money that the city will disperse to, let's say, no-profit organization, any business owner, it would be appropriate to get the backup documentation up front when they file the application, right? Or if they get approved, to ask them for the backup documentation that we support, that they entitled to that they eligible for that, for those dollars, or for that money.
Yeah, when through the application process and the review process, all the backup documentation should be obtained and reviewed and maintained so that you have that for your audit files.
Yeah, and
Thank
I have
you.
a follow-up question. I don't know really how many outside agencies will actually be doing disbursements too. And, there may be few and maybe more than a few. As you guys have gone through this process, has one of the filters been, where else have they received stimulus money, or have they received stimulus money through other channels? Because I know some organizations have and some haven't. So can you just give us kind of your overview of what you have seen in that world and how it relates to ARPA funds?
I know on the applications we've developed, that's directly one of the questions, and it's a significant part of the analysis. So I'll give you a for instance. So say you were just doing business applications. So you would want to review, did they lose revenue, right? Did they lose money? One of the questions asked is, did you receive other grants? That would have to be included in that calculation, because I would think nobody would want to make an entity more than whole per se.
Right.
And evaluating whether they were made whole or not is all funding sources they've received.
Yeah, so that's good. So there's a standard application you're saying which touches on those things, because as important as our spending of the money internally within the city is the due diligence that we do for any projects, just like community development money, when we go through that. I forget the name of that system. Iris system? Linda, is that the one at HUD? Well, we always got in trouble with that one. So, yeah, so good. That's a good checkpoint. All right, council, any additional questions? I'm sure we'll have a chance to meet with Kimberly and Corey down the road. Thank you guys for the critical path information. We're glad that the administration has somebody to lean on as well as us as we move forward. I think Donna made the point early on. We want to get some legacy uses out of this, but most importantly, we don't want to trip up over it. We don't want to say, oh, look, Reading got all this federal money and we don't know where half of it is. So not that we would end up there, but even 1/10 of it wouldn't be good, or 0.2%. So
There's an article in the paper, somebody a little directly east of you is having that issue right now. Upper Darby.
Right. Yeah, no, that's unfortunate. Okay, so thank you guys.
Pleasure.
We're going to move on. The rest of this call is ARPA funding. Did somebody have a comment? I'm sorry.
No, Council President. Next up is the draft allocation plan.
Yeah, and these are draft allocations, subject to change, subject to review, subject. Yeah. So Jamar, you're covering those, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And there was a question in the chat box. Frank is going to explain the grant program and application process. And if you've checked your email, you did receive some of those documents in draft form, and he's going to explain that coming up next. On your screen, you should see the draft allocation plan. This has been reformatted from what we included in the budget after review from ZA. So in the column B, you'll notice project numbers. Column C, you'll notice expenditure categories. These are in alignment with ARPA. Column D, the name of the allocation, and then going forward, the proposed amounts. So first up, under public health, City Hall HVAC in the amount of 3 million was proposed. And for the lot.
Jamar, can I interrupt you for 1 second? So we're going to be having these meetings monthly.
Yes.
So just for a point of reference tonight, we're not going to get into the heavy details of each of these projects. We're going to start to do that on a monthly basis. I just wanted to point that out, Jamar, in case you got too far into it. You certainly can give us a brief overview of the critical ones.
Yes, I did want to just be able to name all of them, Council President,
Yep.
so that it's clear what our plan is. It is important to remember slide 3 of Corey's presentation. It's going to be important that we have orders placed and contracts in place and really payment in the works by the end of 24. So we want to make sure the public and council and everybody has a real understanding of what we're trying to do here, so that we don't do a piecemeal approach the entire next 2 years. Just a heads up. So HVAC for City Hall, a senior telemedicine outreach program being run by the library. Both of those in response to public health. Negative economic impacts, we have support for the Fire Museum, the History Center, and community-based organizations with a focus on arts, culture, and music. The Convention Center Authority, which includes the Performing Arts Center and the arena. That is the one financial expenditure we have to date. The commitment to the stadium is in process. The Visitors Bureau and the commercial facade program for small businesses, those are all going to be negative economic impact allocations. And a lot of that support is going to go to both external and sometimes internal requests. So under services to disproportionately impacted residents, that's going to be housing assistance for displaced residents. Under revenue replacement, which is a bulk of our categories, we're looking to do a residential facade program targeted towards single family homeowners. And hopefully that would include roofing, blight remediation, to include funding for a land bank, the construction for the 9th and Marion Fire Station. There'll be an ordinance coming forward soon for that one because that project is in motion. Apparatus replacements, digitization of our library periodicals, as well as more outdoor Wi-Fi boosting stations is a specific program we've thrown our support behind. Demolition, abatement of unscheduled building collapses, we've discussed that one. Rec commission facility upgrades, that would be support for all of our Recreation Commission facilities. Dam remediation, this is not a total commitment. We are looking to do cost shares with our neighbors. City parks upgrades, that is not city park specifically, but upgrades to all city parks, allocation there of $3 million. The sidewalk repair, that one specifically is in response to the feedback from council, as well as the work that community development did last year to try to get that sidewalk program off the ground. It was identified that more funding was needed, so we sought an allocation for more sidewalk repairs. And All Abilities Park and Dog Park, and CDBG funding to help with that. Neighborhood initiatives, again, that's support for community-based organizations. We've mentioned the administrative expenses. And again, that's more of a not to exceed. We hope not to spend $500,000 on consulting service, due respect to Kim and Corey who are still on. Technical assistance to outside groups. So we had discussed, again, as we look to make sure that we can support some of our community-based organizations, especially ones that may or may not be fully established with a board of directors, a bank account, and a 501c3. We want to help build capacity to the extent that we can, and that's what that allocation is geared towards. And then lastly, we wanted to make sure that we had dedicated support to external organizations at $5 million. And we look forward to engaging council on metrics to determine how that funding will be used to support external organizations. But make no mistake, under a lot of these categories, both external and internal city departments and entities would be able to seek funding assistance. So right now we're looking at an allocation of on or about 48.7 million, with 12 million left unallocated, for a total of 61.1 million. Next up, Frank is going to explain the application process that we fleshed out. Go ahead.
Before you go to that, Jamar, I mean, John raised a point, there's 12.4 left. We talked about 14 million going into the general fund for revenue replacement. And I noticed there's a separate category here on column C, and it may not be the same revenue replacement because it totals more like 31 million. If we were going to use revenue replacement to the general fund, it might very well be that 12.4 is what we're thinking, right?
So I wouldn't look at that 12.4 as a part of the revenue replacement. How do I say this? So keep in mind, over, 2020, 2021, 22 and 23, we are going to seek revenue replacement for the full 61 million, so that we have the greatest amount of flexibility. But it has to be done in stages. We can't get it all at one time.
Gotcha. So at
That's-
this point, it's 14. You're thinking it'll be, okay.
And then-
So that's something to keep in mind, because if we qualify for that level of revenue replacement, and we don't have to get into it tonight, although many of these are good projects, we may have some other ideas along the way as well, because we do have more flexibility. All right. All right, that's a little helpful. Yep. And anybody have questions on this chart before we move on to Frank? Because Frank will just keep going. Go ahead, Bree.
Did Johanny's question get answered? I'm sorry. I don't think I don't think that I heard what was said.
Yeah, Bree, what
That's what I just-
Jamar was explaining was that, yeah, the 14 million is part of this overall allocation. It's actually going to be much higher than 14 million.
Thank you,
He
Jeff.
hopes that it's closer to 60 million. So all the money essentially will have the flexibility of the general fund, hopefully. And that's why it's intermixed here, because assume that all of this was in the general fund, this would still be their proposals or
Thank you.
recommendations. Is that a little clear? Because I just want to make sure.
It's
Bree.
clear. But now it leads me to some other questions that I may
Go ahead,
have.
Bree.
I'm still configuring that information. No, you're good. Thank you both for explaining that.
Okay. Johannes, got another question. I thought we had a separate account. We do have a separate bank account for these funds at this point, Johanny. Nothing has been moved out of that account other than the 3 million that went to the Santander Arena at this point. Is that correct? Yeah, that's the only thing we've physically moved out of the account.
So the important distinction, Councilor Cepeda Freitas, is once we go through the council approved process to move that 14 million that is qualified for 2020 into the general fund, it would leave the ARP bank account and come into the city general fund bank account.
Yeah, and
That part
Bree,
would go to council.
and Bree, Johanny, in fact, everybody, we're going to be working off of this list. We have it scheduled for once a month so that we can get through these proposed or recommended projects pretty quickly, get an understanding of which ones we fully agree upon and which ones we don't. So we're all going to be able to kind of keep track and get updates from Jamar and the consultants and Frank on where we are with the overall revenue replacement amount and how we feel about these projects, because we don't want to go too far down the road without getting council input. And that's really why I said earlier, this is like the beginning of our process. So what I was trying to say there is that we're all going to be getting really familiar with this list. Donna, go ahead.
I just want the public to understand that this is not written in stone. I know you've said that, because I, for one, can see a few that I have major issues with. And we will be discussing all these. I understand that. And it does say clearly there for discussion only, but we just have to reiterate to everyone, this is not written in stone. These are recommendations, but council is the final arbiter of these. So, I don't want anybody who's part of any of these things looking at it and saying, oh, I'm getting, 250,000 or 250, or 2 million, because we haven't made those decisions. These are simply recommendations. And Frank and Jamar, have all these done their applications yet, or have any of them done their applications yet?
Go ahead, Jamar. Go ahead, Jamar.
So Councilor Reed, this afternoon, Frank sent to you a packet including the draft application.
So everybody starts over more or less.
Yeah, and the
Okay.
letter included in that packet explains that regardless of any meetings that have previously been held, everyone will have to submit an application for funding.
And I want to follow up on Donna's point, because you're right, Donna, I'm glad you clarified it for everybody.
I just worry that this is out there now.
Yeah, this is the beginning of our process, and the administration has done a great job of pulling at least this starting list of recommendations together. It gives us a good starting point. I do expect this list to look a little different by the time we're done, specifically because we haven't had a chance to go through it, and there is time here to let this thing evolve. And then this added flexibility that we're really, for the first time, I think we're hearing tonight, really opens my eyes as well. So this is the best process we could possibly do. I really appreciate the administration having meetings, getting a list together, finding the right consultant. They've done everything to get us to this point, which is absolutely perfect. So
May I add a little color to this as well?
yep, Kimberly.
So we put this schedule together with your team, our team, and we do have separate columns. So in that proposed column, that's just kind of our initial thought.
Sure.
This is about where we want to spend that money. Once you guys approve it, then dollars will slide over into the commitment amount. So at this point, it's just, hey, we think we want to do something like this. It's going to cost about this, but let's throw it on just to the proposed column. Once it gets committed, then once actually the money goes out the door, we, agreements get signed, that's when it slides over into the expended. And then it'll be obviously money gone, project completed. So just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit.
Yep.
And the other piece I wanted to just touch on too is, we talked about that 14 million, and that is the revenue replacement. As you can see in the projects that are on there, there's more than $14 million.
I counted 30, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So we
Yeah,
have an understanding.
Can I just follow up on one thing real quick?
You can, and then Marcia.
Okay. There's something that's glaringly missing that
City
I can
Council.
see, and I'm stunned by it, which is GOTA.
Listen, I'm sorry, it's literally on my note sheet
Yeah,
to
well,
say.
and we'll have a chance, council, to add and move, and that's right. So
I mean, we're talking tourism. The biggest tourist attraction in the county is the pagoda. There's nothing here for the pagoda unless I'm not seeing it right.
It is in no way a perfect or exhaustive list, Counselor.
yeah, okay, let me go to Marcia.
Yeah, and I just wanted to be able to follow up and using the analogy of when we do the budget. We have a starting place for the budget. It's not where we end up at. So it's a process, and for us all to realize that we need to be engaged in every step of the process, just like we are with the budget, have our input, and that is the way we make best decisions. And I think that all questions are good questions. So I just want us to be able to be relaxed and use it in this way. And I just feel very secure that we have a firm that's working with us that has experience with other municipalities and really can help us dig deeper into whatever our questions might be. And I also concur with what Councilwoman Reed said. The pagoda is obviously missing. It was on the first document that our former managing director presented to us. But again, this is just the beginning. So we will definitely have to have our priorities added, especially as it relates to our icon.
Okay, good. All right. So we've learned a lot here this evening, which was the
Quick
goal.
question, Jeff.
Yeah,
So
go ahead,
the
Maria.
14 million is part of the 48 million, 48.7, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yep. And in the last line item that say outside other organization, Jamar, what do you mean by that? I mean, what is
So we've received proposals, I don't know, in excess of either 30 or $50 million from all sorts of entities across the city. And we've made no commitment to any of them. That's
Okay.
by external stakeholders. Everybody will be mailed the same application. It will also be posted on our website. We will have a dedicated landing page with all of the documents that Frank sent, as well as the PowerPoint from this evening.
okay? Thank you. Just as a curiosity, that any of this money can be used for the downtown development?
Yeah, it
So,
has all.
Maria, I'm sorry, Council President, but remember, once we move the funding over through revenue replacement to the general fund, we can almost use it for whatever need the city desires.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the big, to me, that's the big balloon here this evening, that flexibility really opens up the door. Not that we don't want to do a lot of the great things that you have proposed here, but we really need to look at our overall capital needs or 1, 3, 5 year budgetary needs. I mean, we're going to have to do a couple overlays and come back to how is the city going to best benefit from this. And we can talk about that more as time goes on. So if there are no other questions on that schedule of projects, thank you, Jamar. I think Frank is queued up. One thing that was missing from that spreadsheet, the city council pizza fund. I don't know how that got. That always gets bumped out. I don't know how. I should have been.
You can apply for a grant. I can tell you how you can do that.
We will. Don't worry. Thank you.
I don't want pizza.
As a vegan,
I like a dry aged ribeye myself.
Okay. I'm up next, Council President.
Yeah, go ahead.
All
Frank.
right, great. I have a short presentation, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I think I got this down pat. Let's see here. Making sure. Okay, great. Before I get started, just want to share, this is a proposal pending either informal or formal approval, and we can talk about that after my brief presentation. So what I'm presenting this evening on behalf of the administration is what we call the ARPA grant application process. And as Jamar eloquently shared, that in that mayor's recommend allocations, the mayor is recommending or suggesting $5 million be set aside to support external organizations. So in order to do that, how do you move forward with that? So the best practices have been seen and is really a grant application process. So I will go over very briefly what that process would look like if that's something that we would move forward on. As I move, second slide. There we go. So just quick background, as we already know, I won't read it word from word, but it's always important to revisit a few moments so we know how we got where we're at. As you know, as everybody's aware, the last 6 months, the mayor's administration has been engaging in public meetings and been having a lot of conversations. And certainly during this process, we got a lot of feedback on the potential needs and of the community. So we listened to the proposals and requests. They were all informal. They weren't committed to anything. They were more of ideas, and we were able to get a feel for what maybe the community needs are. So after having these conversations from the 2 public meetings that we had and other conversations, it became clear that we believe an application process is needed because there's a lot more ask than may be available. And as you know, the public meetings were structured in a way where there was a presentation, group sessions, open mic. So we're different venues, different ways to express. Residents and stakeholders had an opportunity to express in different ways. So you could do the group session and open mic. So as you know, the location, Restaurante Hispano and the Children's Home of Reading in November, December of that's the wrong date there, but it's 2021. So so the goal, what is the goal of this whole application process? And really, what is the goal of this whole ARPA fund process? So I'll read that directly because I think it's really important. The ARPA funding provides an incredible opportunity to access community needs, address disparities, and put new innovations into action and support those in our community most impacted by the pandemic. So that's a general goal, general statement. Now, what would a grant application look like? As Jamar shared, we're recommending to distribute $5 million to external stakeholder projects. These are individuals. There's not intergovernmental. These are separate 501c3s that may have that has a project that meets the application criteria. And I'll talk really briefly about what that is. And certainly, like any kind of grant process, collaboration is always a strong asset. So what would an award amount look like if we had a program like this? The maximum amount an applicant can request is $500,000, and the city reserves the option to award a lesser amount than requested based on demonstrated need and available resources. So we feel this is a best practice because it's 10% of the money allocated. We don't believe it's a good idea to allocate like $3 million out of a $5 million allocation. We do want to have major impact, and we want to be able to have many as organizations as possible to participate. And a $500,000 is a good threshold. That those kind of funding could make significant impact. So obviously the requirements are you have to follow procurement policies and government accounting standards. So we'll just go quickly here. The guiding principles, and these aren't necessarily the exact regulations, but this is part of expansion of the goals, right? We're looking over at long-term impact. We also want to advance racial equity issues. And one would ask, well, what does that really, how's that really defined and what does that really mean? Well, racial equity issues are issues that, eliminate the opportunity gap, and it allows us to target resources to address cases of inequity. So that's part of the goal of some of this funding. Yeah, depending on what type of applications we receive. Is data driven, obviously alignment with other efforts. Another way of saying collaboration. Ability to be measured, we need measured results, right? We have to have impact. How do you have impact? You have to have data. You have the ability to measure it. Otherwise, it's hard to determine the impact. So we see at long-term capacity and efficiencies. So what would this look like? Now, I do have to caution, I probably should take this off here. Yes, is we know that March 1st is really ambitious, but we just put that placeholder in there. But this grant application process needs some kind of approval process or some kind of direction. So that's just, in fact, I probably, for the sake of our conversation, let's do this, just so we don't mislead anybody, because I don't want anybody leaving the meeting today saying this is what we're doing for sure, because communication is important. Let's see here. So, but we have to decide when if we do want to go this process, when do we start this? And we just use March as a starting point. For March, April, May, those are 3 months. We don't want this to go out too far. We want impact. This money is not meant to bank and save, really. The whole spirit of this money is to create community impact. And how do you do that? It's got to be dispersed. And we certainly don't want to hold on to this as longer than we have to. But as suggested by the administration council, we want to do our due diligence. So there's that balance, right? So basically, we would, when there's application process, it's something from the website. Jamar shared, there'll be a landing page. There'll be a very good landing page that will have everything that one will be looking for. And ones who would have questions, there's going to be an email address that's going to be dedicated solely for these type of questions. Instead of putting like the mayor, the managing director, or this person, it will go to arp.readingpa.gov type of address, and the proper individuals will get it from there, because we don't want to miss emails. It's really important that we're very responsive. So like I say, this is what we envision a grant process, an application process would look like. And believe it or not, I am actually finishing up. I will share, this is important, it's almost a disclaimer, so I'm going to read this verbatim. And the reason I'm doing that is it's really important information here, so it provides some clarity. Listening to the council and concerns about previous meetings and possible commitments. So this is a disclaimer, for lack of a better word. Regardless of any prior meeting, conversation, or proposal submission made regarding a prospective project, all entities seeking funding will be required to complete a formal application, because we have not done that. We've looked at proposals, we looked at informal proposals, but we have not had an application process. So a formal application process is required. And the applications will be reviewed by a panel of elected and appointed officials, along with stakeholders and residents from our community. So this is going to be a community-driven type of panel. And this panel will review all the external ARPA grant funding applications prior to submission to City Council. So if this grant program is adopted, this committee would do the vetting, and they would, the scoring, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then they would bring it to council. So council will be looking at a product that's been vetted. It's been, and of course there's a whole nother process with council, but we're bringing you a potentially very strong proposal. So we're going to do a lot of the vetting. Now, of course, how do you form a committee? Well, who should be on a committee, right? So we want a good balance, right? So you want community representatives. So we have two, one from the mayor and one from city council. We feel that's a good balance of one community representative from the mayor and one from the city council. And we'll have to talk about how that process works. Is it informal? Do we have to do a resolution? Legal and our consultant can help assist us on the particulars. 2 city council members we recommend should be part of the grant review committee, because at the end of the day, you are part of the process. And the mayor, as administrative representative, at his discretion to appoint. The city downtown coordinator thinks it's appropriate role, and we want a nonprofit representative on this review committee, but clearly they're not applying for funds, because we don't want somebody on there with conflict of interest. So that'd be the caveat. And so that is kind of the vision of a grant application process. We do know there's a lot of need. There's been a lot of requests, and most likely there's going to be some expectation and good governance to be able to come up with a process that we can externally share with the public. And I'm not going to go through this, but the scope of service of consultant, Jamar did a very well job of going through all this. And basically, it looks kind of redundant, but they all have a specific purpose, but it's about compliance, internal controls, and some accounting features. So that's pretty much the role of the consultant, as was articulated earlier in the presentation. So that is my PowerPoint. And what I'll do before we open the questions is I just want to share what I've sent council in your, I call it your packet. We have sent, and Jamar has mentioned, these are drafts. So let me see if I can share this. There we go. Now this application, we have to tweak it a little bit, but this is what the consultant was talking about. This is a standard application. In fact, I believe this is what the county uses. So we're going to adopt an application very familiar to this. So these cover all our basis on the criteria, and it's also helpful for the applicant to understand what they're applying for and the regulations.
Frank,
Yes, sir.
sorry. You only have one document clicked for your share, so you got to stop sharing that to share the other one.
You got it. Good you tell me that. See, I never had to multi-share, so I learned something new. So that's good. Yeah, that's just good. Just make sure I get the right one up. Thank you, Jamar, because you didn't tell me. I wouldn't know. So there we go. I guess everybody sees that. And so this is what I was sharing. This is a standard, kind of application. We may have to tweak it a little bit to, about maybe our review committee and stuff, but this is what's required. This is the type of information. This isn't a one-page application. This is to make sure it's fitting into the criteria that would require funding. So I wanted to show that, we're not working from scratch. We really have a good process. And then I'm not going to show every document, but I'll show one more just for this. Okay, here is a letter that Jamar was able to draft. And this letter will be going out to the people that we did have in conversations with, and to encourage them, to remind them that they need to apply in a formal process, and we appreciate their time. So this really clarifies, so there's no confusion about any kind of prior meetings and conversations we have. There is a formal process, and of course, we're inviting them to apply. So, and then the other two documents, which I don't need to bring up, let me just get off this here, is I believe there was the application, and let me just see, it was application letter, the agreement template. There was a concern. We give an organization money. Well, how do we know they're doing what they're supposed to? So there's a real standard template that's used for ARPA funds that says you must do this, you can do this, you can't do this, and you must report this. So it's a solid template. You have that in your email packet. And once again, these are pretty solid documents, but they're drafts. I have to make sure they're drafts because I don't want applications circulating thinking that's the actual application. It'll be close, but it may be a little bit different. And then, of course, the rubric. How many times have we seen the rubric? We've seen that document a lot. So I sent it again, right? So that rubric will be guiding for the review committee. So that's the recommendation of the administration on how we think best, if we agree to, at some point, $5 million to external stakeholders. And this is the process that we feel comfortable about because we're a community review type of driven process. So Jamar has something to say, and after he's done, I'm open to questions. Go ahead, Jamar. Fill in.
Just one of the last things, and you've alluded to it, Frank, but I wanted to be clear that everything we've discussed tonight, including some of the documentation that Frank shared with you this afternoon, I have vetted this with my counterparts at the county. So almost nothing that we are doing diverges too far from what the county is doing with their funding. Just wanted to make sure that part was clear, and I'll cede the floor.
All right, so thank you. Before I open up for questions, just two critical questions. And I know Corey and Kimberly are still on with this, but, I foresee, when money becomes available, everybody comes out and wants part of it, and I get that. I really foresee this money for those who had revenue losses or reductions, and it impacted either existing programming and they didn't get compensated anywhere else. So they fell short on their services, or they were already in the middle of kind of a capital process for whatever additional changes, needs that they had from a capital standpoint, just like the stadium and the arena. We know both of those entities for some time were trying to get some major improvements, and that's why they made sense. I think, and this is only my belief, I think part of the criteria here again, and that's why I asked the question earlier, needs to be, did you have a revenue loss? Did it impact existing programming? And, how and what and why and how much do you need to replace that. I get concerned because I know some people are going to reach for this for new programming, and I know suddenly capital campaigns get started, and there's nothing wrong with that. I get that everybody has a need, but this money I don't think should be used to stimulate new programming and initiate a new capital campaign. And that doesn't mean that some of those needs weren't pre-existing and they never started it. So I wouldn't completely rule that out. But Corey and Kimberly, as you see this money disperse, you obviously see a lot of people reaching out for it. And how much is being given to new programming and suddenly drawn out capital needs based on your experience? Because am I too tight in my thinking? That I'm really trying to target the people who got impacted from a standard programming standpoint, who didn't really get a backfill in any of the other funding, or maybe not a sufficient amount. And
Yeah,
then
I don't think you are.
helping those who got hurt.
I think that's the goal. And part of what you'll evaluate is those that truly have lost revenue. And most of my clients, when they're reviewing that, one of the criteria is those who got help from nowhere else are towards the top of that list. Those who did receive other help, not that you won't help them, but they're kind of the second look, the second wave of applications to be reviewed. I'm not saying that's the city of Reading's view. That's most of my other clients' view. Have looked at it that way.
So I think in our rubric, that's something is, I don't know if it's in there, I didn't go all the way through it, but even in our application kind of criteria, we want to make sure we spell that out to people that, for existing programming, was revenue short, was it never covered anywhere else? That makes you, otherwise we're going to get 150 applications. I could come up with a whole new concept, pizza club, things like that.
I believe.
But I'm just trying to really make sure we focus, because I think a lot of these dollars are going to be used for city purposes, and we definitely want to use whatever the amount was, 3, 4, 5 million allocated for those who just didn't have any other resource, or whatever they got wasn't sufficient. So I'll open it up to other council comments. Donna was first, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, just a quick question with the community representatives to be named by the mayor and council. My preference would be their city residents. Is there a way we can make that occur? And that's really to both the administration and the council. I really think it should be city residents who are the community representatives.
Councilwoman, you asked a good question, and from a procedural point, because this, and I maybe ask, I don't know, Jamar, our consultant, maybe our solicitor, do we have to, and I don't know the answer to this yet, do we have to have a resolution ordinance to actually formalize this committee as a formalized process? And I'm thinking maybe that would make sense because it holds some kind of legality, some kind of formality.
Right. That's a good point, Frank. Good.
Okay. And the city resident, obviously, yeah, that's fine. I mean,
because it stands now, it doesn't indicate that, but that's certainly my preference if it's going to happen.
So while there's no requirement that part be done formally, I would encourage it, as that's the way the city typically does things.
Okay.
If I could maybe
Thank
try that we do it quickly, that would be my only hope.
Okay, Marcia? Marcia, you're muted still.
I apologize. I mute myself because my dog often barks, so I don't want to be interfering. So just a thought on Jeff's point. What I'm familiar with grant applications is usually they have some type of objectives to the grant, like what the priorities are for funding. And that's how you actually score the grants, is based on how they align themselves with those expectations. I know at the beginning of the grant application, it talks about the United States Treasury's state and local recovery plan, frequently asked questions. I think for the applicant, it needs to be a little more clear what our priorities are. I believe Johanny had asked that question earlier on in the chat room. I just think we need to list what the priorities are so people don't look at this as shopping around for funding, but they know, does this fit my program or doesn't it? And, is this something that it takes a lot of time to put in a grant application? You want to make sure that as we're reviewing the applications and council's making decisions about them, we're all on the same page about what were the goals to begin with. And so I think that a part of it needs to be more clearly vetted out. And I guess that's my only comments at this point. I want to have a chance to read through it a little more in detail. But I agree the committee should be one that's done through ordinance or whatever. Oh, I know. My other suggestion would be, as far as an agency that's not applying, I think maybe we should use the local expertise we have, either through the United Way of Berks County, who also does grant review processes, the Community Foundation, another organization that does it. Those folks really have the expertise and could help us with the process. So one or the other, I think, could be serving on this committee.
So, Marcia, good points. And that's the one point I want to be careful about, that this isn't a standard kind of open grant process. I feel in our role in this matter is that the federal government has given us a bunch of money, A, to use for city operations, but B, to identify those who perhaps didn't get the help they needed during the standard programming. I mean, standard, whether it was, I can't remember all the other names, but yeah, the CARES Act and everything else, or some of the business supplements that went on, et cetera, that we identify organizations who had existing programming, who had to upkeep that programming as well, because some couldn't anyway, and had a loss of revenue, and that we're trying to fill that gap. I just really feel that's our mission in this case with this money. So I just want to make sure as we go through this application process that we really spell that out to people. If you were impacted by COVID with existing programming, what was it? What was it for? How much, did you spend as you normally would? How much revenue did you lose because of COVID? And did you receive any additional funding elsewhere to help cover that? And then I think our eyes in this instance is to fill those gaps for people. And there may be a lot of that, I just don't want to send a message to people like this is an open grant season. I'm going to create some new programming. We've always wanted to do A, B, and C. Now would be the time, because I don't think that's what we're looking for here. I think we're looking for those true gaps. And I really want to kind of spell that out. And you made a comment, Frank and Jamar, I'd like to give us another couple of weeks to look at the documents that you sent to us today before you launch the application process. I know you're anxious to get it going, but it may stimulate other questions, and we might be able to give you some added input to either streamline it a little bit or whatever. But I think council, is that what I heard from you, Marcia? You would want a little more time to read them? I was thinking the same thing. Okay. Additional comments? And
yes,
Corey and Kimberly, if I'm off base, let me know. Who is that? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
it's Johanny.
Oh, Johanny.
Hi, everyone. So I have a question in regards to accountability. So when an applicant, and I don't know if this is part of the application process because I need to read it thoroughly. I didn't make time to do that as of yet. But when someone requests money for specific projects, specific outcomes, how is that going to be reported back to us? And I say this because I know that when the pandemic first hit, unfortunately, some businesses had to shut down, even though they still received funds from the city to assist them. So, obviously we're in a unique situation here. We have all this funding. So I kind of want to have a guarantee that whatever is being proposed to happen, that it's going to be happening. And we have a way of measuring it and getting some reports back or something to that effect.
And Councilwoman, that's why I shared these draft documents with you. And I do apologize, you only got them today because I had to put everything together. So I know the opportunity hasn't existed yet, but there'll be the application the council president mentioning really covers a lot of these things. Of course, it needs to be reviewed. We may have to tweak it, of course, but I think a lot of the concerns are shared this evening. The application process does address many of these things, maybe not everything. And the same thing about accountability. Of course, accountability is really critical. And that's why this agreement that is in order to receive these funds is a very specific, very detailed agreement. And it's a binding agreement. There's consequences for not being accountable. And this is a very thorough agreement. So it's similar to the agreement that we've already, I believe council's already passed for the Santander money. So those are boilerplates that are set up to hold accountability. But these documents have sent, I take the opportunity to maybe review. We need to tweak them a little bit, but I think they're a very good starting point, and I think they address maybe not everything, but a lot of the concerns that I mentioned this evening.
Yeah, and Johanny, it's a good question too, because the other thing about filling voids in existing programming is that they already have a history, hopefully, of that programming of 2, 3, maybe even longer, years. So we know that they're already doing it and they can easily justify it as part of the allocation of the funding. I'm on the BCAP board now. It's not specifically a BCAP expenditure, but they ran out of housing money. The county, the city, we ran out. They're a big tool in providing some of that emergency housing and rental assistance. And, we know they do that programming. We see it all the time, and they could easily justify it moving forward. So that's the other thing I like about filling the voids of existing programming is that, we're not going to get hit by any surprises either. Hopefully, if we're creating new, if we're start funding new programming, could be a lot of what ifs there as well. And I again don't think that the purpose of this money is for building new programming. I think it's filling gaps of existing programming through the COVID period that may be able to, and even if it impacts them moving forward, it's still impacted by COVID. They have a need to get up to speed. So good questions. Additional questions, anyone? All right, Frank, I'm going to ask that we get a couple of weeks to look at the documents you sent us today. We're scheduled to meet. We rescheduled March, right? I'm going to ask if we get something back on the agenda. I'll coordinate that with you and Linda, probably a Tuesday again, so that we can continue to put the focus on this issue. And I don't want to hold you guys up too long with the application process. So let's.
We're looking at the next meeting on March 15th.
That's a Tuesday?
Yes.
Will Frank buy a pizza?
That's right. Take care of it.
The Ides of March, guys. Ooh.
I'm hoping by then we'll be meeting in City Hall, by the way. So
Oh, that's right.
we're going to figure that out in the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's our goal.
Get a pizza son. OMG. Do you know how happy I would be?
All right, Brianna. Frank will buy pizza and welcome us back. Yeah, you heard it.
I don't know who I need to talk to about it, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we're trying to get Brianna. I don't know if you were on last night, but we're trying to get green light to start meeting in person. I'm hoping by the 14th of March we'll have that, but we're going to find out. Okay, is there anything else that we need to cover? If not, that's a lot of great information. Thank you, Jamar, Frank, Mayor, Corey, Kimberly, everybody. We appreciate it. And I have a lot more knowledge this evening, so I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Good help. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.